So JD Vance made an appearance at a recent Turning Point event, and this event was held at Ole Miss. And we also had Erika there, who gave the intro speech before JD took the stage. However, there was a lot of spicy stuff that happened that people are currently talking about. So we had Erika with her leather pants, and then we also had the cringy kind of hug between Erika Kirk and JD Vance. So let's start with the pants. I don't really have an issue with the pants. She can wear whatever she wants. However, I think if you do look at some of her outfit choices from past events, namely the one where she and Charlie Kirk did an event together, and she had that really floral looking outfit, really pink and feminine and all of that stuff. And so her fashion choices just from that one picture seem like they don't really fit the Turning Point brand. That could just be me. And then we had people criticizing the all-white outfit that she wore for the first speech that she gave, and then people did not like her outfit with the memorial speech. And so now people do not like her leather pants. I really loved how she looked when she looked really fresh-faced when she made the first appearance post-assassination on the Charlie Kirk show. I thought that was when she looked the best because she wasn't overly made up and all of that stuff, but people did take issue with that because she was smiling and seemed overly happy considering everything that has happened. Now, the hug with JD Vance, I had mixed feelings on that. I can understand why people are commenting on that because the way that she cupped her head, that does seem like a romantic gesture, but then people did make comparisons to a hug that I think she gave Usha Vance, and she did the same thing. She grabbed her head. And so people are saying, she's overly touchy, whatever. So it's not a way of her being flirty with JD Vance, but I can understand how it does look bad. This is Hey Brittany. Welcome back. Alrighty, so let's get into the general vibes of this debate, this appearance. So it did seem like a really good debate. We had JD Vance talking, giving his speech, and then they moved into the Q&A portion, and this seemed like it went by really quickly. They said that he took the stage for an hour, and I don't know if that was the full time including the speech, but I didn't feel like he spent an hour debating people. Now, I'm not sure if I liked his answers. If you couldn't remember the question or you lost track of the question, it would have been easy to get lost or wrapped up in his answers and not really understand that he wasn't answering the question, at least in my opinion. Now, let's get into Erika's speech. So I initially skipped her speech. I really wanted to focus on what JD Vance was going to say and then the Q&A portion. JD Vance is someone that people have question marks on. A lot of people say that he does a good job speaking, but then other people think that he is either being racist or he's being discriminatory and that he's throwing his wife under the bus. And so we're going to get to a moment that he talked about his wife and all of that stuff. But really what I want to go back to his Erika's speech. So I did not watch it the first time through, and then I felt like I had to go back and listen to what the questions were that people asked JD Vance, and I said, you know what, let's just go ahead and listen to Erika's speech so that we can comment on it for the purposes of this video. So the best way to say what I want to say is I understand that she's going to be making the rounds for a while and basically giving speeches at different campus events and different Turning Point events, and so I do wonder if and when she's going to transition to debating people, because I feel like if she really wants to step into Charlie's shoes and continue what he's doing, she would need to do what he literally was doing, which is debating people and having these conversations. And so I really want to hear more about what her ideas are and what her answers are when she's put in the exact position that Charlie Kirk was put in. And the reason why I say that is because she is giving speeches right now, and I know that her first speech was a big deal and her second speech as well, but right now I really want to see something different from her. And with Charlie Kirk saying that she's more conservative than he is, I really want to know more about her ideas than hearing the inspirational speeches that she's giving. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I do want to see more from her and just kind of see her trend in a different direction, because once she completes her rounds and makes her speeches, she's going to have to pivot and do something else. And so I think that this is a perfect time for her to showcase what her skill set is and actually continue what he was doing, which is publicly debating people. Now, there were two things that caught my eye during her speech, and I'm going to play a clip for one part where she said something that I found to be pretty profound.
I personally still believe in America. I still believe in her founding. I still believe in her future. I don't care if people think it sounds crazy, but I still believe that our nation can heal. But we can't save a country that we're too afraid to defend. We can't.
Okay, so what is really profound there is that she calls out two things. We need to heal, and then we need to defend America. Now, in terms of what America has to heal from, I'm not sure if she's just referring to Charlie Kirk's assassination and the aftermath, or if she's referring to America's history in general, because a lot of people say that America is known for doing really kind of questionable things that you wouldn't normally associate with what America stands for. And so what I'm trying to say is that we have the conversation around slavery and how people are saying, this was a work internship program or something like that, kind of downplaying it. And then you have all of the conversation around white nationalists and then what it means to be a patriot and fighting for your country. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I was actually watching the TV show Shooter, and there was a scene where they brought in the Alpha Society or something like that. And basically it was an all-white group, and what this ties into is the whole idea of serving God, serving your country, and being a patriot, and what does that mean exactly when certain people say that. And so it's been super interesting to have this conversation around what it means to be American, what it means to be a nationalist, and what it means to fight for your country, and what exactly does America stand for. So a lot of people, especially people who do not live in America, they seem to be more aware of like world history and America's true history in terms of how we were founded, what things went on in America, and all of that stuff. And so when you talk about America needs to heal, you also have to acknowledge what was done in the past in order to move forward. And the other thing that ties into is defending America. So really, when you think of defending America, you think of defending freedom of speech, the right to vote, and then also the right to pursue opportunities or things that would make you happy. And all of this ties directly into defending America. So when you say that you are a patriot of your country and that you are defending America, what does that mean exactly? And I want to point to Shooter again, because this is obviously a political thriller, and what was important is that there were a lot of people in Shooter who were talking about how they were patriots and they were defending their country, but they were also doing bad things in order to defend their country. And so when you think about that, it does make you wonder, what exactly are we defending? Are we defending the idea that everyone has rights and everyone should be treated the same? Or are we defending the status quo? Are we defending the ability for certain people to stay in power? Next up, Erika talked about courage, and she was really talking about Charlie Kirk's routine. She talked about how she put this saying or this quote on the wall, and then she also talked about how Charlie saw that quote every day, and then he also had 3 questions on his desk, and we can let her talk about that a little bit more.
And it would be, what is something I can do for someone today? The second one was, what is something I can do to add value to the world today? And the third was, how can I honor God today? Those were the 3 questions combined with the words he saw every single morning. So to me, seeing on his desk, that was him suited up with the armor of the Lord every day. That was his combination. And what I'm realizing with that is, those were the action points of how to have courage.
So what I find interesting about that is obviously a lot of that comes from religion. So if you're not a religious person, your 3 questions are going to be framed very differently, right? And I don't know if most people think about things like that when they wake up in the morning. They may be thankful to be alive. They may think about how they have to work on a project at work or how they have to do something for their kids. But I don't know if everyone thinks about how they can positively contribute to their society. What good can they do? And I think that if more people thought like that, that would make the world a better place. But you don't have to be religious to do that. You just have to want to be a good person. Next up, let's talk about Christian values. So we're just going to go ahead and play the clip on that.
Values out there that I think that we've just sort of assumed and we've in fact taken for granted. Christian values are the idea that you should respect every single person as an individual, whatever the color of their skin, created in the image of God. That's a Christian concept. And in fact, it was a Christian empire, Great Britain, that abolished slavery to begin with. The idea that we should eliminate child sacrifice. What did the Christian settlers find when they came to the New World? They found a lot of civilizations that were murdering babies in weird religious rituals. It was Christianity that said we don't kill children just because they're somehow inconvenient to people.
Okay, so a lot of good stuff there. So first, obviously, what I want to preface this with is that we know that people have used religion to basically justify doing evil things. So slavery is one of those things. And so this is probably a moment where people are looking at JD sideways and saying, hey, religion is not all that it's cracked up to be. Obviously, it depends on who's talking and how they're using religion and what their track record is. And so there's a lot of people who have a problem with Christian nationalism or the way that Christianity is being talked about right now, because it doesn't seem to be coming from a genuine place, and it seems to be coming from a place of upholding a certain power structure. And I want to point to that TV show Vikings, because he did talk about child sacrifice and basically abortion and weird rituals and all of that stuff. And so when you frame people's religious beliefs like that, you are kind of upholding Christianity as kind of being superior to other religious practices and other religions. And so I do find that interesting because, like, for example, Vikings, they were pagan, they worshipped different gods, many gods, and all of that stuff, right? And so when you have people who came to America, there were Native Americans here, they had their own rituals, their own way of life, and basically we're judging them and saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this and all of that stuff. But there's not kind of that respect of understanding that if you say that God created everyone to be equal and all of that stuff, that in some sense you do have to acknowledge that another person's way of life is not a bad thing and it's not inferior to your way of life. You have to be more accepting and more tolerant, but at the same time, I think that you do have to allow people to express their beliefs, but then also maintain certain boundaries to make sure that it's kind of peaceful for everyone, if that makes sense. And I know that that's going to be complicated because people who have different religious beliefs, they're always going to be at war with other people who don't believe the things that they believe. Next up, they talked about harvesting data, so basically collecting people's internet browsing history, things that they're buying with their credit cards, and all of that stuff. So we are going to play a clip on that.
No, I don't condone it. And here's the thing. So I get asked about Palantir a lot because there's this internet meme out there that somehow I am super in bed with Palantir. And here's the thing that I'd say about this. Palantir is
I want to pause it there because I did see like a post or an article about this, and they were trolling JD on this moment because they were saying it's not like it memes you make fun of like real life situations, or you apply a specific situation like your reaction or whatever your feelings in that moment to another situation that would have a similar reaction. And so it's not necessarily that someone is making this up out of thin air or whatever. And people are saying that, I think Peter Thiel, if I'm saying his name correctly, he's the one who propped up JD Vance, right? And so they're saying there's a connection there, and that's why you're being associated with him. It's not people just kind of making this up and pretending that there's something there when there isn't anything there. So I did find that part interesting.
Private company. They sometimes do a useful service, and sometimes they're going to do things that we don't like. You should be demanding that your representatives do two things when it comes to Palantir or when it comes to any other technology company. Number one, protecting your data. What's going on with artificial intelligence is going to mean that there are massive inducements to steal your data, to harvest it, and to use it against you to sell digital advertisements. That is not what I believe in, and I've been fighting against it, whether it's Palantir or any other tech.
I want to pause it here because this is super interesting, because what he's talking about right now is basically you getting personal ads and being encouraged to buy stuff. But I think there's a bigger kind of agenda with harvesting your data, and we saw that happen with like Facebook and all of that stuff with COVID, and really helping to push certain propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, that sort of thing. And so if people understand in a more intimate way what you're doing on the internet, what you're buying, they can more easily influence you, not only to buy stuff, but to also do other things and to believe other things.
Technology company literally before I ran for office. When I ran for office, I was criticized by Republicans in my Republican Senate primary because I was talking then about Google and Facebook harvesting our data. It's unacceptable. I don't care who does.
So yeah, it was good to see him take this stance against what Palantir is doing in terms of harvesting data and other technology companies as well. I am curious where this is going to go down the line and what ultimately will be the real outcome of this. And so I don't know other statements that he's made on Palantir, so I'm not sure if he is being truthful when he makes this comment, because there are a few other things that were said in this debate that people are saying, like, hey, this doesn't match what you said before, and this is more so about his relationship and his religion as it relates to his marriage and his wife Usha. Okay, next up, I want to move on to a question that he got from a Indian woman. And I really found this part interesting because you have a Hindu woman who seemed not necessarily angry, but she seemed frustrated, and she's really letting JD have it with the different points that she's making. And I thought it was interesting that this question came from like an outsider, and I also thought it was interesting because you wonder what are Usha's views on everything that's going on, especially with people talking about how he's embarrassed her in public from commenting on her religion and all of that stuff, not defending his kids and his family and all of that stuff. And so I thought that this was a very interesting thing to have happen, and these were interesting statements to come from this specific person. But I was also confused when she was asking her questions because she seemed frustrated and upset, right? But then when he was answering her question, she was clapping and she was cheering and all of that stuff. So I was really confused about the purpose of her questions, which is why I said what I just said. But there were at times when she wanted to kind of interrupt him because he was saying something, she was clapping, and then she raised her hand, and then basically the guy next to her who was holding the microphone, I guess, told her to put her hand down and let him finish. And so I just found this whole exchange to be interesting, and this is also what people are commenting on the most as far as what I've seen on social media about this debate. So let's go ahead and play a clip on one of his answers to her questions.
But I think everybody has to have this own conversation when you're in a marriage. I mean, it's true for friends of mine who are in Protestant and Catholic marriages, friends of mine who are in, atheist and Christian marriages. You just got to talk to the only advice I can give is you just got to talk to the person that God has put you with, and you've got to make those decisions as a family unit. For us, it works out. Now, most Sundays, Usha will come with me to church. As I've told her, and I've said publicly, and I'll say now in front of 10,000 of my closest friends.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it here before he gets into what he's about to say. And so what I find super interesting is because, one, he's in an interracial marriage, and then he's also in an interfaith relationship. And so with this particular marriage and relationship, there's two layers here. There's people of two different races, and then there's people of two different religions. And I find that interesting because if you think about a white man being with a black woman, and they could still have the same religion, but they're just dealing with those racial differences. And so I believe, and I would imagine that it adds additional tension and stress to the relationship when you're also dealing with people who have two different religions, and you have to figure out how to balance that. And so I think he's going to answer that question in this clip that I have, but I just find that interesting how people are talking about this, and people take issue with what he says about his wife in terms of her relationship with religion.
Friends, do I hope eventually that she is somehow moved by the same thing that I was moved in by church? Yeah, I honestly do wish that, because I believe in the Christian gospel, and I hope eventually my wife comes to see it the same way. But if she doesn't, then God says everybody has free will, and so that doesn't cause a problem for me. That's something you work out with your friends, with your family, with the person that you love. Again, one of the most important Christian principles is that you respect free will. Usha's closer to...
Okay, so the ending there was very important. He's talking about the idea of free will. So with Christianity, there's the understanding that everyone is made equal, but then you also have to let people do whatever they want to do, basically, because of free will. And I do want to go back to what I was saying about the relationship in terms of the religion. So he answered earlier on or around this part of the debate, and he basically said that their kids were being raised Christian, and the woman who's asking this question, she's posing the question of how do you determine which religion to practice, or why is your religion above their mother's religion, that sort of thing, right? And so for whatever reason, they've chosen to raise their kids as Christian, but I'm interested in why it had to be either or. They should have just had like a interfaith household to where they celebrate the Christian holidays, they celebrate the Hindu holidays, and they observe practices from both religions. And I want to point to the movie To All the Boys I Loved Before, and this is definitely a movie I should not be watching, but whatever, it's a really good movie. It's just very wholesome when you watch all of the other stuff that I watch, right? And so anyway, In this movie, you have a white dad and 3 Asian daughters, so his kids are biracial, white and Asian, and their mom passed away, and to stay connected to their mother, the father has the girls participate in certain, Chinese or Asian holidays in honor of their mother's heritage, and then that also helps keep them connected to their grandparents and their mother's side of the family. So in that sense, they are involved in both cultures, and so I imagine it doesn't always have to be one or the other. You can find a way to blend that and do both. So I don't know why they chose to raise their kids as Christian, but the other thing I want to point to that I found super interesting is that people did not like that he made this comment about wanting his wife to convert. And what I initially thought of when I heard him talking about this was the idea that if your religious beliefs mean a lot to you and they're a deal breaker for you, you would not marry someone or be with someone who is not as religious as you or doesn't see religion in the same way, because that's going to be a deal breaker. So if you are really religious and you marry someone who's an atheist, that's not going to work. And so I think from that perspective, both of these people have to not be as serious about their religion, and serious is probably the wrong word to use here, because that's the only thing that would explain why they were able to marry each other and have different religious beliefs and not have any conflicts, so to speak. And so that's why I don't take issue with him saying that her family was kind of, or at least that she was agnostic or atheist, because people didn't like that, because they were pointing to another clip where they had an interview together and she was saying that she grew up in a religious Hindu family, and so people are like, she said that she grew up in a religious family, why are you saying that she was atheist? And so what I want to point to with that is you can have people who grow up in a religious household, but when they're adults, they're not as religious, or they are kind of pushed away from religion because they don't like the way that they grew up. And so I don't know if that's the case here for Usha, but again, I want to point to the fact that if your religious beliefs are a huge deal to you, you're not going to compromise and marry or be with someone who doesn't at least have the same standard when it comes to religion. And that's like saying that a white supremacist would marry a black person. Like, that wouldn't happen. Like, if you are a white supremacist and you marry a black person, you're not really a very good white supremacist, right? And so I just find that interesting, and that's my 2 cents on this part of the debate. And the other thing that they talked about is this woman, she really pressed him on immigration, and she was basically frustrated because it seemed like they were talking about immigration as a blanket statement rather than legal immigration and illegal immigration, and what they seem to be going after is illegal immigration, because she was really frustrated because she was like, hey, you brought us here, you sold us a dream, we've paid into the system, and why do we have to be Christian or like you guys to prove that we're one of you? And so I did think that that was a valid question, because they do talk about needing to assimilate into American culture, and what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that you just observe the major American tradition while still being able to honor and practice whatever other traditions that you have from your home country? Or does that mean that you have to completely abandon any practices or traditions that you have that come from your original culture and your country, right? And so I do find that interesting on what the line is in terms of what it means to assimilate into American culture. I think at a baseline level, people would say that you have to speak English and you have to know the Constitution and then you have to work hard. But other than that, I don't know what people would say is proof that you've assimilated into American culture. Okay, so I want to move on to the next clip, and this is also related to religion, but they're more so going to talk about Congress and religion, so we can just go ahead and play the clip on that.
Do you think that what happened is the Supreme Court interpreted Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion to effectively throw the church out of every public space at the federal, state, and local level? I think it was a terrible mistake, and we're still paying for the consequences of it today. But and I think this is your point, if you were to undo that, if you were to get back to a system actually meant by the founders where Congress is not setting up an established religion, but people in their local communities can kind of do whatever it is that they want to do, I think that would be a better system than what we have today. But I think the most important principle that we have got to remember is you do not have to completely kick God out of the public square, which is what we've done in modern America.
Okay, so this is super interesting. So first, just to clarify what he's saying here, he is saying that the First Amendment basically says that Congress can't establish or kind of make everybody else follow a religion. Everybody can do their own thing when it comes to religion, because one of the things that came up was basically saying that you can't say a prayer in school, and he was like, no, you can say a prayer in school, it's just that you can't be forced to say a prayer in school. And then he's also talking about how basically church was removed from society at the federal, the state, and the local level, which I found super interesting. And what I'll say about the local level is that you're really seeing a lot of this right now when it comes to everyday life, because you have people who are coming here from other countries. They have different beliefs and religious practices, and I've seen a bunch of complaints online of people who are in like American cities, whatever, and they have Muslim people there who are praying like 5 times a day. It's really loud for whatever reason, and they're annoyed by this, right? And so when you think of freedom of religion, you think that these people should be allowed to do that, but also there's like common decency, and there's also what you do in the public square. Yes, you can do whatever you want, but you also understand that you're not just trying to bother everybody else, right? And so it seems like there's a fine line there on whether or not you want people to practice religion and whatever in public spaces at the local level, because you are seeing that now, and what you're seeing is a clash between religions, because I don't think anyone wants to see a preacher standing on the side of the road preaching to everybody, quoting scripture and all of that. Like that would be, and it seems like it would be really annoying. Like you want to be able to physically go into a church or a place of worship and then experience whatever you're trying to experience in terms of religion versus it being forced on you. And so I do think that this is not necessarily going to go the way that he is laying it out in this answer, because even at the local level, you do still have some issues, even if nothing is being forced on people by the government or by the city. And so my point is that it becomes slippery when you have people who want to practice their religion, they want to do it in a public space, but then it leads basically to a noise complaint, and there's nothing that you can do about it because you're preventing somebody else from practicing their First Amendment right to have whatever or practice whatever religion they want. And so I think it becomes a little bit tricky navigating that conversation. And then also they talked about the differences between Christians and Jewish people. And I found this interesting because it made me think of the interview that Brandon Tatum gave with Bibi Netanyahu. And basically people had a field day with him saying that he or they were only spit on once. And so this speaks to the tension between Jewish people and Christian people. And basically he's talking about, hey, you have differences, you just talk it out, you just have a discussion, that sort of thing. But in some conversations and some topics, you are past the point of discussion. Like there's so much intensity, there's so much hatred there, that's why you have people spitting on people who don't practice the same religion. And so I don't think in some instances that it's just as easy as having a conversation. You may need to have several conversations, or you just may need to approach the conflict in a different way that doesn't lead to violence. And so my point is to say that there are a lot of conversations happening right now, and yes, they're just verbal, but they're not civil, and it seems to lead to the end result of promoting one group above another, and I don't think that that's helpful either. It should really be an acknowledgement of the differences, and each group is on equal standing, equal footing. Okay, next up we're going to talk about immigration.
And you try to follow it as best as you can, and that's what I try to do. I want to make a final point. So I don't want to cut you off. I want to be respectful to all the people behind you in line, but I want to make this point about immigration, okay? If you ask the question, what is the exact right number of immigrants for the United States to let in, it is just very specific on the context. If you go back to the 1920s, the United States passed an Immigration Reform Act that effectively cut down immigration to close to zero for 40 years in this country. And what happened over those 40 years? The many people who had come from many different foreign countries and different foreign cultures, they assimilated into American culture.
Okay, so I looked into this a little bit, and I was curious about what he was saying about that 40-year period where there was basically no immigration. And so ChatGPT is giving me a few time periods, basically. So I was talking about the restriction era, which was 1924 through 1965, and basically it capped the number of immigrants allowed from each country based on the U.S. population in 1890, and then it was the goal was to favor Northern and Western Europeans like British, Irish, and German, and severely restricted Southern and Eastern Europeans, Italians, Poles, and Jewish people. And then it completely banned immigration from Asia, except for a few categories like students and diplomats. And then it talks about immigration to the U.S. dropped from over 700,000 people a year early 1910s to under 100,000 a year during much of the 1930s through 1940s. And then during the Great Depression and World War II, immigration was at its lowest point in modern U.S. history. Then it talks about the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, and it was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. This law abolished the quota system and replaced it with a preference system focused on family reunification and skilled immigrants. And then after 1965, immigration rose dramatically, especially from Asia, Latin America, Africa, reshaping the U.S. population. And then so it says, was there no immigration? Not exactly, but for roughly 40 years, 1924 through 1965, immigration was extremely limited and racially biased. Asian immigration was banned, and overall numbers were very low compared to before and after that period. So this comment is interesting from him because it's basically kind of setting up the narrative that America is better when we weren't letting any immigrants come into this country. And that's a pretty weird thing to say when you are one married to an immigrant. People took issue with this because it basically feeds into that idea of white nationalism and how white people built this country, and this country and America is supposed to be a country for white people only, and that sort of thing. And so when you point out like, hey, 40 years we didn't accept immigration and people who moved to our country or whatever, they assimilated into American culture. And so that goes back to the person who asked him this question about immigration and was really frustrated. That speaks to the fact that there are immigrants who have come over, have paid into the system, and they belong here in that sense because they came here legally. But here he is talking about how basically America was better when we didn't have any immigration. In other words, what people take this to mean is that the goal in terms of what the ideal number of immigrants is 0 from this example that he's bringing up.
And there was an expectation that they would assimilate into American culture. I think we have two problems in our immigration system today. And my guess is you're probably a slightly more leftist political persuasion, liberal political persuasion, maybe not. But here's the thing. I remember back in my establishment GOP days when I was still very early getting involved in Republican politics, I remember a conservative think tank person who told me that one of the reasons why immigration was really good is that if you had enough diversity in a country, people would mistrust each other and they wouldn't join labor unions.
Okay, I want to pause it here because this is a big thing. So basically what he's saying is here, you want to intentionally flood a country with immigrants so that basically nobody can agree on anything, and it makes it easier to find people to work, especially if they can't work because of a union that they're in because they're demanding something, or it makes it easier for you to go to another group of people to get the work that you can't get the original group of people to do. And so what he's saying is that immigration is good if you want to cause chaos, basically. And so he is going to continue with what he's saying, and I'll let him finish the point.
Okay. So when I see a lot of left-wing people who theoretically support organized labor saying we need to flood the country with a limitless number of immigrants, they're unwilling to set any limitations on it. My response to that is you are destroying the very social trust on which American freedom and prosperity was built.
Okay, so that's the end of the clip. So I think that makes sense when you talk about, okay, immigration, it causes chaos because people don't agree on things, and it just makes it easier for you to basically keep circling to find a group who will do the work, and then when they won't do it, you can just go to the other group because they're feuding and all of that stuff, right? But then also he was saying, we did have people who came over from other countries and they assimilated into American culture, but now he's talking about how this idea, you have people coming over from other countries, they're immigrants, but they're not assimilating into American culture and they're causing chaos, basically. And so I find that interesting because if people were assimilating into American culture and there was more kind of shared interest or common interest, he would not be able to make this comment and say that immigration in a general sense causes chaos. And so I think that if that person, that think tank person, hadn't said that to him, I wonder if he would have a different view of immigration, because the idea here is that someone told him, hey, immigration is good because it causes chaos and it just makes it easier for you to get the working class to do what you want them to do if they are feuding with each other, you're just going to find the group of people who are willing to do the work because they see the advantage there or whatever, right? And so that is an interesting idea, but it also speaks to the fact that you do bring in immigrants because you can pay them less. They will do the labor for cheaper, right? But then it also speaks to intentionally causing distrust in society, because then if all of the jobs are gone because immigrants are taking them, then you have the people who are Americans or who already have their American citizenship. They are getting frustrated with the immigrants, and then you see the feuding between immigrants and Americans, at least illegal immigrants and Americans, and then I'm sure people who came here legally, I'm sure they're kind of awkwardly caught in the middle of that conflict. Okay, so this next part I want to talk about is aid to Israel, basically, and this guy asked him a very specific question, and the question was framed as basically, why are we doing all of this stuff for Israel? And I didn't feel like JD answered the question based on how it was asked. He gave it like a positive spin and gave that corporate non-answer that I hate, and so I'll just let you guys listen to some of his answers to the question that this guy had.
It doesn't mean that you're not going to have alliances, that you're not going to work with other countries from time to time, and that is what the president believes, is that Israel, sometimes they have similar interests to the United States and we're going to work with them in that case. Sometimes they don't have similar interests to the United States. And this example, the most recent Gaza peace plan that all of us have been working on very hard for the past few weeks.
Okay, so the issue that I have with that, and that is just a small snippet of his answer, but the question was like, hey, why do we give $3.8 billion or billions of dollars to Israel? Why do we call them our greatest ally? Why are we supporting them, helping them out? And so he says, hey, you just have shared interests sometimes. And then he goes into the Gaza peace plan. And yes, that's a good thing, but none of that really ties into American interest. And so I do find that interesting that he didn't really answer the question in terms of why this question was asked and the energy that it was asked, if that makes sense. Next up, this is kind of a really funny moment, and I did see another commentator talk about this, and I had a different reaction to it, and so I'm just going to play the clip, and then I'll give my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I'm a comedian.
I like this guy. Who is this guy?
Thank you, JD. I like you too.
Now he's gonna ask the question about all the shit that we did wrong, but that's okay. Go ahead and ask your question.
But yeah, I'm just wondering, well, it's not necessarily something you did wrong, but it's what could someone else do wrong? Let's say we get a complete tyrant in office, and let's say Turning Point USA is having a huge protest against, something really bad that we don't like, and let's say he's, a president is saying that it's getting violent. How can we, I'm trying to think, my mind's kind of blank. What is the difference between what you're doing and how could we prevent someone from abusing that power?
Okay, I want to pause it here because I watched a commentator talk about this clip, and basically what he said was that when this guy was asking the question, he basically had a oh-ish moment, and he realized that what he was describing was something that could happen to him, and that's why he got stuck on this question and didn't know how to ask it, and then maybe pivot it to a different question. I thought that he got stuck because he was too busy trying to be funny leading up to this, and he just completely lost track of his question. I also thought that with the question that he was asking and the way that he framed it and the words that he was using, I initially thought that he was mocking what was going on and kind of being sarcastic and like a smartass, and so I thought that was the energy that he had when he was asking that question. The reason why I thought this question was kind of like him mocking the situation, because he said, what if we have a tyrant in office? People are literally saying that Trump is a tyrant, and then he's talking about protesting, but he talked about Turning Point USA protesting and basically people not being allowed to protest and all of that stuff. And so I thought he was actually describing like what was actually happening, not some hypothetical situation. So I found that interesting, but I really thought that he lost his train of thought because he was too busy trying to be funny, and then he got that reaction and then it just threw him off. I don't think he was having like some aha moment and he just realized that he could experience exactly what he was describing. So that could be true, that may be true, but I don't think that that's what was happening here.
Yeah, so look, I understand where the question is coming from, and I think it's a fair question. And it's going to sound like I'm being sarcastic, and it really is not meant in any offense. But when you talk about what could another administration do, to take a wild, hypothetical example totally off the top of my head, What if Joe Biden sent the Federal Bureau of Investigation to start arresting his political opponents?
Okay, I want to pause it here because his reaction was weird. He said, it's going to sound like I'm being sarcastic, no offense, all of that stuff. And then he gives a hypothetical. So that's why I think that the question was originally asked or meant to be asked in a mocking way. And then he just pivoted his question. And I think JD is picking up on that because he's giving kind of like that. She says he's not trying to be offensive or whatever, but he's basically saying that this is a silly question because it's already happening and we've already seen the Democrats do that. And so I just found this exchange interesting for that reason. I'm not sure how you guys saw it.
Okay, so here's something that I want conservatives. I want every conservative to remember. It's an important part of my entire political philosophy. Is we cannot be afraid to do something because the left might do it in the future. The left is already going to do it regardless of whether we do it. That is.
So what he's really trying to say here is that basically you shouldn't be afraid to do something because you think somebody else will do it to you. And that's kind of how they say basically treat other people how you want to be treated. And so the perspective that people have out there is that Trump is a dictator. He and his party, they're doing things that they should not be doing. And so in that sense, when you think about the question that is being asked, people are already doing or punishing people who don't agree with them in a sense. And so him saying, well, we can't be afraid to do that because the left may do it to us. They've already done it to us and they're going to do it in the future anyway. And so I think it becomes messy when you kind of go tit for tat like that. You should really be trying to, whatever your agenda is, trying to accomplish it to the best you can. But also you should take all Americans into account. You shouldn't be just trying to push certain political agendas, or you shouldn't be trying to push agendas in order to create chaos in order to get whatever you want, because a lot of people are talking about the government shutdown right now, and they're saying that the Democrats are using starving people basically for leverage, and then they're saying that the Republicans are doing the same thing. And so it just becomes messy when you think about what one side is doing and what the other side is doing, and then just fearing what the other side is going to do it back to you. And so that's obviously not a good way to live. Just treat people how you want to be treated. If you want to protest, let other people protest. If you want people to be able to speak freely, let other people do that, right? And so it just comes down to treat other people how you want to be treated, and you don't have to really worry about what's going to come back on you. Alrighty, lastly, I want to talk about Thomas Massie. And so we had a debater ask a question, and Thomas Massie, I've done maybe 1 or 2 episodes on him, and basically he's Mr. No. He votes no on everything. And so I know that from a past dispute, Trump basically endorsed another person ahead of Thomas Massie. They were beefing really hard, and it basically, from what Thomas Massie was saying in that interview that I watched, he was basically saying that him and Trump feud every 2 years. And so it seems like they are going full circle again to where Trump is not a fan of Massie and he's endorsing somebody else instead of Thomas Massie.
I think the problem with Thomas, and I've told him this in private, and now I guess I'll say it in public, is it's one thing to disagree with the party on a particular issue. It's one thing to to have your independent stand on a number of questions. And by the way, some of the stuff where Thomas Massie has been independent against the Republican Party, I've agreed with him with. Thomas and I worked together during 2023, where I was trying to stop the limitless flow of American money to Ukraine, and Thomas was one of the people I was working closest with it. But that's one thing. Being independent, having your own opinions is one thing. Voting against the party on every single issue, you're eventually going to make too many enemies. And
So I find that interesting because yes, you can be part of a party, but that doesn't mean that you have to agree with them on everything. However, if you aren't agreeing with them on anything, why are you part of that party? So it's either that Thomas Massie is in the wrong party, or the Republican Party is not what it's supposed to be or what it should be. And so I find that interesting that they're saying basically that Thomas Massie, he needs to adjust or pivot because he's not standing with his party basically. So it sounds like he's saying that Thomas Massie should be an independent, but from that interview I covered, I think that he was basically saying that being an independent is difficult because everything is set up for the two-party system. And he was talking about how, I guess, in Congress, they have like basically two lobbies, one for the Democrats and one for the Republicans. There's nowhere for the independents to go, so they have to choose a side. I don't know if they float back and forth, but basically I think he probably is an independent, but he's probably Republican on paper because of the two-party system. And so I do find that interesting that he's calling him out for voting against the party on everything, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. Like, if it's genuinely something that he doesn't agree with, then he should be able to say no. But if he's just saying no to be a pain in the butt and all of that stuff, and it's not actually what he believes, I think that that's a different conversation. Alrighty, so that's everything that I wanted to cover in this video. We didn't cover all of the questions that were asked, but I did try to include the things that I found important or the things that resonate the most with me. Let me know your thoughts on this Turning Point USA event. Is there anything that was said that you disagree with, or is there something that you thought should have been talked about more that social media and the news, mainstream media, is not talking about enough? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.